G'day everyone, Dicko here with another kick-ass walkthrough. This is part 4B of a multi-part series covering character rigging. In the last video, we had set up our FK spine, like so, with its hip controls, and a global control to sort of block out the initial steps of our rig. And for those who are building basic rigs, this is perfect. That's all you need to do. You can move on to the arms and legs and head and all that sort of shit. Though, if you want some extra control, we can actually add some squash and stretch to this rig through the means of bendy bones in Blender. So that's what this video is all about. We're going to add some squash and stretch to this guy while adding some extra control to the body as well. So, if you want to have squash and stretch and you want to build cartoony rigs, this is great. Bear in mind though, this method only works within Blender. So if you plan on building a rig with the intention of exporting it out to say Unreal or Unity or whatever, it won't export these bones, okay? That's for the next video. We'll talk about how to add squash and stretch that can be exported out into a game engine. But for this video, it's all about just getting some squash and stretch in a cartoony rig that you can use in Blender for animation. So to do that, we're going to have to remove a few things. So we have to remove a few of these constraints in the spine. We'll have to add a few new ones. And then we'll have to add some extra controls around the spine that will control essentially what is an IK spine rig. So you'll have the best of both worlds. So you'll have the FK and the IK to play with without having to really switch it up either, which is really cool. So let's just talk about what you need to do. Let's talk about the hierarchies. And I'm going to use a diagram for that. I'm going to write out a diagram and just show you what the logic is in this setup, all right? Okay, so let's talk about what's going on at the moment with the rig setup. So we have our global control at the top of our hierarchy. Global control. And then we have our COG, which is our center of gravity, at the hips, or at the middle section of our body. So center of gravity. And then from there on, we actually have a split. We have a split in the hierarchy where we have our hips going down the body. So we have our hip control. And then we have our FK spine control. And from there on we have, FK 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, and 3. Going down, with a parent relationship, essentially. And from there, in between, we have our deformed bones being influenced by those. So in order to get squash and stretch to work with this, we want to create a secondary IK spine, which will work in relationship to this. So the interesting thing about that is that the hips are technically controlling the lower part of the body, the lower body. And the spine at the moment is controlling the upper body. When you build an IK spine, you're going to sort of merge or work with both of them in between. So essentially what we'll end up having is a IK spine that will be partially influenced by the hips and then partially influenced by the FK spine. So we end up having like a relationship like this. So the hips will control the first IK spine control. And then we have IK spine 2 being influenced by FK spine 2. And then finally we have IK spine being controlled, IK spine 3 being influenced by IK spine 3. It's a bit interesting because what we're going to have, we want to have as much flexibility in this IK spine. We essentially have two pivots, one for the upper body and then one for the lower body. But in the case of this setup, is the hips will also control the first IK spine influence. So we don't actually have to build a new control there. What we will need to build is controls for IK spine 2 and IK spine 3. And it's worth noting that the IK, it will be the IK controls that will influence the deformation. So these guys will influence, IK will influence the deformed joints. Okay, so essentially what we're going to have, if we break it down in a much simpler way, is we'll have global COG FK, and then we'll have IK, and then we'll have our deform being influenced. So that's the current logic with the spine, at least. This is how we're going to set up the hierarchy of the spine. That being said, there'll be some helper bones in between that will help us get that relationship working. We need to actually add some extra bones that won't be technically control bones, they won't be deformed bones, but they will be mechanism bones. They will influence how we operate the rig. All right, so let's jump back into Blender. Let's start to work out these hierarchies in action and get that squash and stretch working. Okay, so we're back in Blender. Let's reiterate again. Global control, hips, FK, and then influencing the deformed bones. So what we need to do first at the very start is essentially remove some of these constraints. We don't need them anymore because they're going to be used in a different way. These deformed bones are no longer going to be directly influenced by the FK. They will become directly influenced by the IK. So we need to get rid of those copy transforms. So let's get rid of those. 1, 2, and 3. We're going to get rid of those. And what we're going to do is actually copy these FK controls here and turn them into what will become our IK controllers as well. So we're going to go to edit mode, and with these guys selected, 1 and 2, you can just do that in pose mode now. I'm just going to duplicate those bones, and straight away I'm going to move them to a third layer. Just push M on the keyboard, move them to a third layer, just like that. So what we'll end up having is a layer system where we have our global controls, we have our FK, we'll end up having some IK controls, and then we have our deformed bones at the end there. So to make these easier to select, if we have both of these selected, we're going to change the scale of these controls. Very easy to do. Just select this bone, and then in the bone setting down here, we can change the scale a little bit further up, just so when we go to have both layers selected, we can now select both separately. To make this even a little bit more clearer, we can actually add a new bone group over here in the bone group settings in the armature setup there. I'm going to make it yellow and assign them so I can select them. And I'm going to rename those as IK in the groups. Finally, we need to rename the actual controls. So we're going to select these bones again, 1, 2, and Control F2 to bring up our batch rename toolset, which is one of the best features since 2.8. Love it. We're going to set the data type to bones, and we're going to find the word or the phrase FK and replace it with IK. And it should only rename those bones that are selected and rename it with this detection. All right, let's rename those. You'll get a little notification, renamed 2 of 2 bones, which is great, perfect, what we need. And finally, we just need to change the number on those suffixes. So we're just going to change it to IK torso 01 and IK torso 02 in the outliner, so it makes it nice and clean. Actually, I might call it 2 and 3, as weird as it sounds, to make it in line with the FK. So I want to make sure that FK torso.002 is in line with IK torso.002. And you'll find out why once we bring back the hips. So right now, nothing is influencing our deformed bones. Nothing is doing anything there. But notice how they still have the relationship with the spine at the bottom base there. So we need to change the relationship of the spine here for the IK. So what we're going to do is for these two bones here, we're going to actually make them a child of the COG. And it will make sense shortly, but basically we want them to work independently with one another from the hips. So we can get that dual pivot action in the IK. So we're going to grab these two. We're going to go to our COG at the bottom there. And just push Control P, keep offset. So now the IK at the moment is not influencing the those controls at the moment. We will change that hierarchy soon, but we just need to keep it clean for now, just so we know what we're doing. And we can move on from there. Alright. So with that out of the way, we can actually hide the FK for now. We're going to hide the FK. And just have our IK selected and our deformed joints. So now we're ready to add some squash and stretch. We're going to add some squash and stretch with some constraints directly to these IK controls. But first we need to switch our visual display as B-bones or bendy bones. That will help us inform how many subdivisions we're going to add to these bones. Okay, so firstly we're going to go to display as bendy bone, B-bone, and you can see here it's looking really, I guess, like a Minecraft rig almost. So what we need to do is just make the display a little bit less thick. So we're just going to go into tab into edit mode, select all our bones, hold down Control Alt S, and scale down. Scale it down so you can get to a more comfortable sort of scale. That being said, I want to keep these ones a little bit thicker so I can just see how that's being constructed, and I can select through my bones like so. See, I can see through them, and you can actually select through those selections a bit easier. Okay, so what we need to do now is set up a few helper bones. We're going to set up some helper bones to help get our squash and stretch up and running first. And to do that, we're just going to let's just hide the whole setup there and just go straight to our deformed joints. And I need to create some helper bones at the base of our setup here. So I'm going to make a helper bone here. So put the cursor selected, create a new joint or new bone, and just going to scale that down. I'm going to keep it a little bit thick so I can easily select that. I'm going to duplicate that and put it there as well. Cursor to selected, selection to cursor, same thing there. And one more there, cursor to selected, duplicate that, selection to cursor. Finally, we need to do this one more time, but we need to have it so the duplicated objects, so the duplicated versions of these bones will be sitting underneath these bones. And it will make sense in a moment. It will make sense, don't you worry. So firstly, I'm just going to scale these a little bit thinner. And I'm going to go cursor to selected first. So cursor to selected, selection to cursor. And I'm going to move that bone down. And just get the tail of that bone. The tail, not the whole bone, just the tail. Let me hide that bone for a second. Just the tail of that bone, selection to cursor. And do that one more time down here. So I'm going to hide that hip joint for now. Let's just get the base there. Bring that down. Selection to cursor. So what we're doing here, we're building some helper bones for the twist. So what will happen is that we'll create some subdivisions with this bone, with the bendy bone subdivisions, and then add a couple of constraints. We're going to add a damp track and a stretch tube, but we'll get to that in a second. First thing we need to do is rename these guys. We're going to rename these bones and remove them from being deforming bones as well. So let's grab all those bones there, go to our bone settings here, and alt-click deform, to get rid of it as being a influencing bone. So these becomes non-deforming bones. That means we can turn them into mechanism bones. Let's just rename these guys. So the base of these little bones here, these two here, we're going to call these MCH for mechanism, twist parent .001. I'm going to copy that. For this one here, I'm going to call it twist parent 002. And for these flatter bones, we're going to call them twist aim. These are twist aim bones. And in fact, we don't need it on this one. We just need it on these two, to be honest. So we can actually get rid of this one. Call this one MCH. Actually, I'm going to call it MCH spine twist aim .001. Spine twist aim .002. Make sure I have that there as well. Spine twist on the parent naming as well. Spine twist parent 002. Spine twist parent 001. Okay, let's unhide what we hid before. So what we're going to do now is create the constraint relationship between these controls. But first, let's go to these deformed joints. So deform spine 2 and deform spine 3. If we zoom out, these are the ones we're selecting here in the hierarchy. And we're going to add some subdivision segments on the bendy bones. We're going to add, I'm going to say 4 on each of those. And what we're effectively doing in Blender is dynamically subdividing those two joints, those two deformed joints, to be 4 segments. And it will make sense in a moment. So now, let's just go into pose mode, and we're going to add some constraints. So this bone will influence the squash and stretch of the spine 002, or spine 003, sorry. So we're going to grab this one, grab the second one, go to Control-Shift-C. We're going to add a damped track, which is essentially an aim constraint in Blender. And then we're going to add a stretch 2 constraint as well. So what we're going to get is something like this, where it will control the squash and stretch. Check that out. How cool is that? Okay. Let's do the same thing on this mechanism bone. Damp track. Stretch 2. Okay. And again, check it out. We're getting some squash and stretch. The problem is now is that it's not twisting. We can't twist it. So we need to add some influences. And that's where these bones really come into play. So what we need to do is set up these bendy bones to have some twist inheritance. So what we're going to do, we're going to have the start handle and end handle be assigned to these different joints. Okay, so let's talk about how this works. The reason why we need to have a bone at the base here, beneath the base, beneath the base of this bone, is because the tail end of the twist influence is done through the tail of the previous bone in the hierarchy. It's really weird. It's really annoying, but that's just how it is. So if I were to have this bone sitting at the base of this bone here, it just won't work properly. It'll just spaz out. So what we're going to do, we're going to make the start handle, this bone here for this bone here, the start handle of our bendy bone there. So let's just demonstrate just to show you. It's easier to show than tell, really. We're going to grab the name of this guy, spine, this one here, MCH spine twist aim, and make that the end handle influence. We're going to grab the spine twist parent and make that the start influence. And we're going to switch it from automatic to absolute. Do the same thing on this bone. So this spine twist aim copy will be the end handle for the first bones there. And then the spine twist parent will become the start handle there. Absolute. Okay, so now what we're going to get is some twisting influence. How cool is that? So now we've essentially got this setup working where the twist is being influenced pretty well. The problem is here, you can see here that this twist is affecting the top of this bone, but it's not affecting the base of this bone. So now we have to build up the relationship with the IK controls to have these both move at the same time. So now if we bring back our IK controls and our global controls, you can start to see what the relationship will be. So essentially, this bone here, this spine twist aim.002 will become a child of our IK torso 003. Like so. So we're getting that working. These two bones will become a child of the midsection IK torso 002. So now, if I were to influence that, you can see we're getting the twist that we want across the board. Okay, and finally, interestingly enough, this bone here, will become the child of the hips. So we get this going on, and you can see here at the moment we have a little issue, and that is that this bone isn't a child of anything. You can see here, if we go to our spine setup here and we go to relationships, we need to set up this def spine 002 to be a child of this twist parent. So we're going to grab this, make it a child of that. Now check it out. We're getting squash and stretch from the bottom. We're getting squash and stretch from the top. And then we're getting some in the middle as well. We got one little issue again, one more to go. We got the upper body needs to have a new parent relationship. And that's going to be directly influenced by control IK. So let's check that out. Ooh, squash and stretch. Twist. Check out the twist. How cool is that? Really cool. And we can also influence it like so. How cool is that? Now there's only one thing I want to add to this to make it a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more natural to use from an animator's perspective. And now I want this middle control here, this middle control to sort of sit in between, in the distance between the hips and the chest here. So this control here will no longer become a parent of the COG. It's going to become a parent of a mechanism bone, another mechanism bone. So what I'm going to do is, just to select it onto this bone here, I'm going to create a new bone, scale that down. Like so. And firstly, I'm going to disable it from being a deformed bone. I'm going to call this MCH spine, IK spine. I'm just going to call it midsection parent .001. It's the best name I can think of in the spot. Okay, so what we're going to do is make this bone a child of the COG. So go back into this pose mode, make this a child of the COG. Keep offset. And essentially what I want to do is have it influenced both ways by these bones. And you'll see what happens. So I'm going to grab this hip control. I'm going to say copy location. It snaps down to the location of the hips. Then I'm going to add copy location to the spine from the top down. So from the top control to this one, another copy location. But this time I'm only going to have it influenced by 50%, 0.5. So what I'm going to get is this effect, this action here. Ooh, it's only influencing 50%. Okay, you can see what I'm trying to do here. Last thing I want to do is add a damped track to just this control here. So I'm going to add a damped track to this control. So now you can see what's going on. It's aiming at the spine, which is really cool. So just a damped track, that will do. So now all I need to do is make this control a child of that parent helper. So check this out. What we're going to get is a really clean squash and stretch rig, which we can then still influence without any constraints on that IK control. How cool is that? Super, super cool. All right, so now, how do we get this guy to be influenced by the IFK on top? So to cap off, all we need to do is figure out how we're going to influence the FK of this entire setup. So let's bring back the FK controls with everything else and see how this can work. So firstly, I'm going to grab all these mechanism bones and move them to their own layer underneath the global layer. So just on their own sort of mechanism layer, just so I can see where they are independently. Okay, so the upper body is actually quite simple. Just have to select the IK control and make that a child of the FK control. Very simple. Keep offset. With the middle control, it's a little bit more trickier. We have to select the midsection parent and then make that the child of the FK control. Keep offset. So let's see what's going on now. That's working. As you can see, that's working. Now, this part's a little bit trickier. The hips are a little bit trickier because we need to have it be influenced by the hips and the base of the FK here as well. So we actually have to make one more helper bone in this one here. So I'm gonna go into edit mode and I'm gonna duplicate that bone, scale it up just a little bit, scale it out or down. Actually, scale it down and scale it down like so. I'm gonna rename this as MCH Spine FK Parent. MCH FK Spine Parent. That's 001. And essentially what we need to do is set up a series of constraints that will work with this thing. So first thing we need to do is make this bone a child of the FK. Keep offset. So now if we move this bone, it's manipulating the that control, that mechanism there. Now we need to make this bone here, the twist parent, a child of the FK spine parent.001. Okay, just like that. And if we do that now, it's influencing the upper body, as you'd expect. The problem is we've lost the control from the hips. Not to matter though, we can fix that. All we need to do now is go to the hip control, select the spine twist parent, Control Shift C, and we're going to add a copy location constraint. We're going to set that to local space and local space. And then we're going to add a copy rotation constraint as well. Local space and local space. And instead of setting the mix, so right now, if we manipulate the control at the moment, it's working as you expect. We've got back the hip control there. Okay, so the only issue you have left now to fix is that I've noticed that the pivot point for the spine isn't quite aligned. That's because we have the twist parent pivot being down here somewhere, but the actual spine pivot's here. So what we need to do is just switch up the location of this parent here, of this control, the FK spine parent. So let's just do that. move that into place, selection to cursor, just so it sits up there at the base of the spine. So now that's moving as you'd expect, in place. And you can see here that we have one little issue with the hip control. So again, because we have it set to local rotation on the rotation there, what we need to do is actually create one more helper bone that will influence this. So we have to remove the constraints off this one, and then we need to create one more bone at this point here. Scale that up. Make sure it's set to local individual origins. I'm going to scale that up just so we can see it. And now this bone will become the child of this bone. Let's just hide it. This FK torso parent will become the child of that new bone we just created. So I'm going to hide that, child of. There we go. So this control will have this control will have the copy location, copy rotation, local space. So now that will pivot as you'd expect. Perfect. There we go. And there we go. Perfect. Now we have the complete rig set up, ready to roll. And you can see here, we have complete control over the body in terms of pivots. So we can actually pivot from the top here. If you want to like have the character swing, we can easily have him swing from the pivot of his chest up there. We can have him, obviously swing from his hips. So we can have it pivot from his hips. Or we can do the traditional FK control where you just, animate up the spine. So you have a ton of control going on. The only issue with this setup is with the damp track. So the damp track is influencing the way that the midsection is twisting. And if you rotate the FK controls, we get a little bit of a chink in the rotation there in the spine. But when it comes to the actual deformation, it doesn't really influence that much in terms of the volume of the character. So I feel you can get away with not really caring about that. But if you wanted to compensate, you can easily just grab the move controls on the IK and just push out that spine a little bit when you're animating. So that's the only thing you have to do really to get that spine looking super clean. But otherwise, it's perfect. I think it's all you would need to do for a very nice animation. But especially for cartoony stuff, really cool. As you can see, you're getting some ridiculous amount of flexibility there. And of course we have our traditional straight up animation going on there. Just make sure you've locked off your FK controls from being able to be moved in space, because they typically stay put. You don't have to change the location of those controls, just the rotation. All right, so that's it. That's the twist controls. And as you can see, there's still a limitation with bendy bones where if you overextend it to 180 degrees, it snaps. And we can talk about how to fix that in the next video with the Spline IK. Spline IK setup. That's going to be even more advanced. So that's a crazy ass setup. And even for this one, it's quite complicated for those who are just starting out. That's why it's really important to try out the first video. So if you are overwhelmed by this, go back to the previous video and check out that one. But otherwise, that's it. That's the Spline IK. That's the, not Spline IK, that's the bendy bone setup. Super cool, super flexible, and really fun to use once you've got it all set up. So until then, until we get to the next video, I will say catches and have fun. Thanks for watching.